the whole gist of this, I'm going back to the first slide here. The whole gist of this is that I just wanted to, when I was trying to figure out what to talk about, I was talking, just kind of thinking to myself, and I said, self, I could go up here, I could show some code, I can tell you, what we're doing, but really I think a lot of people want to know exactly what happens during Android programming during the day. What is your everyday like? How do you actually take your code and your skills, how do you put it together, how does it work with a team, and that sort of a thing. And since Ancestry is in this growth period right now, we are struggling with this kind of thing. How do our teams function? How do our groups function? So I wanted to go through exactly what we were doing, because so far we've been pretty darn successful with it. So let's take a stroll. So this is kind of what it looks like inside Ancestry right now. We're down in a building in Provo, but we'll be moving over here in May. So I'm not exactly sure if it's still going to look like that. But it's just pretty loose cubicle style system. You kind of pick a spot and work. So in the morning, what do you do in the morning? Well, so we go there. Of course, we get a drink and we put our headphones on. And usually for me, hey, when I put my headphones on, that means leave me alone. I'm getting in the zone. So it just kind of lets everyone know I'm working. Who here knows about Agile? It's pretty big. I think everyone should know it. So we use Agile processes. Typically, it's more like one called Kanban. We use one called Scrum, and we kind of mix these, and it's fairly light. But we have a thing called sprints, and sprints is basically a 2-week block where we say, in these 2 weeks, what can we get done? And then we kind of go through all the list of all the features that our project manager wants inside the app, and we say, in 2 weeks, what can we accomplish? And we break them down into these things called stories. And so usually in the morning, if your story from the previous day is done, you'll go and you grab a new story, and you start working on that. If you want to know more about Agile, if you don't know, I highly suggest you go over, and I should have put it up here, but it should be, I think it's just agilemanifesto.org or Agile Alliance, I can't remember. But just type in Agile Manifesto, look it up. I used to work in defense before I came to Ancestry, and we didn't use Agile there. We used waterfall and some other processes, very heavy processes, very hard to change once you get started. And Agile is just that. It allows you to take 2 weeks, get something done, and then since priorities have changed, we take those new priorities and run with them. It allows us to be, Agile. So we grab the story. And sometimes it's like, yikes, this story is much more work than I thought it would be. So you look at it and you think to yourself, wow, what can I do? This story, what I thought I could get done in 2 days or 3 days, it looks like a 2-week job now. Boy, some people aren't going to be happy. So one of the options that we do, and we do this quite often, is we go through kind of like a build or buy thinking process in our head. Now, we don't actually go out there and buy a whole lot of software anymore, because so much software out there is open source. People are freely sharing. It's really great. So we start looking at third-party libraries. Android has some very good third-party libraries these days that's really built up really well, and there's a few people to thank for that. So, but how do you choose a third-party library in Android? What do you have to think about? Because you just don't want to go out there and grab one willy-nilly, because that'll lead you down some dark roads. So how do we find the libraries? Well, primarily we go to these 2 sites here. This one's pretty good. They keep it up to date. This one is kind of like a little bit better because you can actually kind of search for the ones that are kind of out there. They're a little nebulous. So if you go to this site right there, you'll find some of the stranger things to kind of help you out. But really, if you go to this site right here, what they do is they break it down into the must-haves. Like in the very top, they'll say, if you don't have these, like you're dumb. These are the ones you should be adding into your Android project because it will save you months and weeks of work. Secondarily, sometimes you can just Google it. And also, if you go to GitHub and you do a search, sometimes by word search, you can find people who have little projects out there that they've done that can save you some time. For example, about a month ago, it was about 3 months ago, started a new app. And the new app, I needed to catch up with iOS. iOS had a whole quarter ahead of me, and I had to catch up. And I was like, oh man, I do not want to sit here and rewrite, bringing in images and doing all just just stuff that I've done before. So I went back and looked at our old code, and I said, okay, what can I bring over from our old code? But our old code was like too tied in. It wasn't very modular. And I said, okay, I got to find a third-party library. And so I just went through this thinking process in my head and started there and found one I needed. I actually found it through Android Arsenal, and it was a pretty small project, but it saved a day or two of work. So it was pretty nice. Now that you've figured out what kind of libraries are out there, you have to ask yourself, okay, now how do I select them? Because there's going to be a lot out there. Android open source has really picked it up. Oh, and by the way, I didn't say it, but if you just want to stop and ask me a question, stop and ask me a question. I'll have the slide deck out there if you don't want to like copy it or take pictures or whatever. But anyway, let me get back to it. So you have to ask yourself who developed it. Now there's 3 big names I know. One is Google. Google actually does have third-party stuff that they kind of put out there. So you can go and actually find things that they've done. Square, you guys know the little credit card swiping company? You've ever seen them in iPads where they put the little squares in there on the side? Anyway, they have a very, very, very good Android team. And anything done by Square, you can trust. If you go to their GitHub and you find Square, if you look there for all their Android stuff, I wouldn't hesitate to use it. Jake Wharton, he's kind of like a hero. I think once you start digging down into kind of like the Android life, you'll find that Jake Wharton, his name is out there. He'll pop up. The guy is brilliant. He does a lot of very good stuff. He even had a library called Butterknife, and it was just named that because it was kind of silly, and it turned out to be a really nice thing to have, and a lot of people use it now on their projects. Another thing you got to ask yourself is how complex is the task I'm actually doing? Because sometimes when you want to grab a library, you might make a mistake. If it's only going to take you a day to build this thing, maybe you should just do it yourself. If it's not very complex at all. If it is complex, of course, then you'll probably want to think twice about rewriting something that's already out there and freely available. Another question you ask is, do other developers respond to it at Stack Overflow? You'll go to Stack Overflow sometimes, and sometimes you can just type in the name of the library, and you actually see a bunch of hits. That can either mean one of 2 things. One is maybe the thing's not so good, and people are having a hard time with it. But another thing it can mean is it's very popular, and a lot of people are using it, and there's going to be a lot of support there when you run into trouble. Reddit's another one. You can go to, I think it's called Android Dev. You can subscribe to that, and there are a lot of people around there. I've even seen Jake Wharton and some other guys hanging around there. GitHub. Go to GitHub. If you're looking at a GitHub library, you can see how many people have actually started that thing. That means they're interested in updates to it and how is it coming along. Another thing you can look at there is when it was last updated. You don't want to grab an abandoned project. That's really bad because we all know that eventually code gets deprecated, and you want to grab some code that some guy hasn't updated for 2 years and it's all deprecated, and it's just all bad. So you want to ask yourself these things before you go and grab a library. Of course, your company, your lawyers are going to be looking at licenses and that sort of thing, but that used to be a big problem years ago. I don't think it's so much a problem these days. I think everyone's like, oh, it's a Apache license, okay, whatever.
What's your Facebook flat buffer thing?
So Facebook is actually kind of squeezed in pretty good in Android. They have had a new library come out they call flat buffers. So Facebook is another big name that you want to look at. They found that JSON actually wasn't moving as fast as they wanted to, and so they designed a really quick way to sift through data. So they called it flat buffers. Really complex, but it looks pretty nice. So they're another name to watch. Okay, so you're in the middle of your story, and you have found a good third-party library to help you, and all of a sudden, your QA walks up. And at Ancestry, our QAs are embedded with our teams. We'll have a team of Android programmers. We'll have a project manager kind of giving us assignments, and then we'll have an embedded QA person in there. And he basically is like your guard between you and your users, right? He's like the last wall there. So he's a friend. Sometimes we don't think of QA as a friend, but they are friends. So he walks up to you and says, "I found a nasty bug." I'm like, "Oh, really?" And he says, "Yeah." He says, "Watch this." And he does a few things, and boom, blows up. You're like, "Oh, we didn't test that. That's our bad." And then we ask him, "Well, is it in the store build? If it's just sitting in an engineering build, then it's not so bad. We'll just put it on our stack of things to do for the next sprint." But if he goes, oh, it's out there, it's on the Google Play Store, it's in the Amazon Store, we're like, because our customers are going to catch it. And of course, we want our stars, right? We want our 5 stars, so we always shoot for the 5 stars. So immediately we kind of go into triage mode, like, what are we going to do about this nasty bug? And we also use Crashlytics. It's been bought up, I think, by Fabric a little while ago. They're really great. You can put in Crashlytics, another third-party library, and they'll basically send you things like, oh, you've got these 4 users, they've had this problem constantly. Oh, what device are they using? How much power does that device have? How much memory were they working with? So they're really good. Once you start getting into really deep Android programming, not just making calculator apps and throwing them out there just for practice, but once you start making a real app where it really matters to you or your company, Crashlytics is a good company to look at. So anyway, you've got this bug. It's a bad one. This one's crashing, and it's crashing often, and you didn't expect it, your users didn't expect it, and they're starting to complain and grumble on the store. And so it's pretty widespread. So you've got to stop your story. At this point, it's a matter of priorities. Now, like I said before, that 2-week sprint you have, if something doesn't make it to the end, your product manager, if you have a good product manager, they'll go, we understand. We want a good product. We're going to have to stop and actually fix this bug. So if something doesn't make it in that 2 weeks, say you had like 10 stories, say you've got to drop a story on the floor and say that's got to wait for the next sprint. Well, that's part of being agile. So you get to it. And so you halt your story, but you've made a whole bunch of changes. At this point, you got to ask yourself, what do I do with these changes? Now, hopefully you've been using Git. Git is really good at who here has used Git? I don't want to explain it if everyone knows it. Okay, I'll explain it kind of quickly. Git is a way to store your data, and it stores your data out in these repositories, and you can make branches. Basically, imagine a tree, and your main tree, your trunk there, is like it's your golden master. You don't want to leave it alone. That's the one that goes out to the Google Play Store. But as soon as you start coding, you might break stuff, you might test stuff, you might be building these stories. You start making these branches. So what you do is you make this branch, and it doesn't go out to the Play Store, but you can kind of keep it safely tucked into the repository. But at the same time, you're not messing with that golden trunk. So we use branches, and so every time we make a feature or a bug, we branch. At that moment, we just make a new branch. We start going right there so we don't mess around with our golden calf. Okay, we use Git flow. And if you haven't looked up Git flow, look up Git flow. A lot of people, Git is very powerful, but it can be confusing to use, especially for people who don't know how to use it yet. So go check out Git flow. It was invented by a guy named Vincent Dreisen, and everyone's just kind of adopted it. I don't think I've met any Android coder that we've talked to in an interview or hired or even just any Android programmer that didn't know what Git flow is. Git flow is probably one of the best ways to safely store and use your code repository. Okay, so NPE, a null pointer error. These things are, sometimes they can be easy, sometimes they can be rotten. So a lot of times if it's just a crash, it's a null pointer error. That means something happened in your code and a variable where you thought was going to have some data in it no longer has it, and the Android system goes to use it and crash, it goes down. So null pointer errors can be bad. Kotlin, so I want to talk about Kotlin a little bit. No one's using it in Ancestry right now, but we're thinking about it. We're kind of playing with it. Kotlin is actually, if you don't know, Android is actually written in Java. Kotlin is not Java. It's a Java replacement, whole new language that is kind of built on top of, lost my train of thought here, the Java virtual machine. It's built on top of it. It's not Java, but it can be used by the Java virtual machine. Kotlin, one of the promises is that we can take care of these null pointer errors for you. Do we have any iOS engineers out here? Got one? OK. So we got the new language out there for iOS, Swift, which is really nice. Kotlin, I would compare that to Swift. Basically, just like Apple looked at Objective-C and says, man, we need something more centric to the platform, we're really hoping, fingers crossed, that Google out there makes a choice and chooses Kotlin. The Android Studio is what we use to program with. Android Studio is made by the same guys who do IntelliJ, and those are the guys who actually developed it. So they have a pretty close relationship with Google. So we got our fingers crossed, maybe at the next I/O that we hear that they move over to Kotlin. Okay, so now we're in this like crunch time. We got this nasty bug. We have to ask ourselves, do we want to fix it or just Band-Aid the thing and wait and fix it later? So you have to actually ask yourself this question. Now, Band-Aid is just that. It's just a Band-Aid. It'll stop the bleeding. It doesn't fix the problem. So it may stop the crashes, but we really haven't solved the engineering portion of the problem. Band-Aid it. That's what I always go for. I just want to get it out there. I just want to get it done. I want to stop the crashing on the users, get it out there, because we can do that with the Google Play Store. We can just fix it, put it on the master branch, kick it out the door after the QA puts their stamp of approval on it. We can have it out to the users in a couple hours. And then we can make a new bug and handle that in the next sprint. We can say, oh, we got this bug here, but right now let's just patch it. So Band-Aid it. No, fix it. So you have to ask yourself, do you want to be a good engineer or not? And this is the battle, this is the inner turmoil of me personally. Because sometimes I just want to Band-Aid it, but I know it's a bad thing. I'm like, you fix it and you're like, oh geez, I can't believe I did that. And you have other engineers look at it and they're looking at you like, oh man, you're a bad programmer. So you have to take these variables in there. Time, how much time? If it's exploding in the Play Store, you want to Band-Aid it. You just want to get it out there and fix it. Maybe tomorrow you can put out a brand new build that has the real build in there. And of course your team's going to slap your hand sometimes, or sometimes they'll agree with you, Band-Aid and get it out the door. So these are some of the questions that you have to answer, and we do this quite often. Okay, so we made this change, and now we have to get some more eyeballs on it, because you are a developer, but you are also part of a team, and your company's counting on you. It just can't be your own eyes on it. So you've made a change, and you can't just check it right into that master branch. Remember, that's your golden calf, your golden trunk there. You don't want to mess with that. Even if you really want to get it out the door, you get it on its own branch, just like you would a feature, and you have the other developers inspect it. And they go through it, and they'll be like, okay, that's okay. I think that's a good idea. Let's go ahead and let it go through. Or you could have a developer out there going, whoa, whoa, whoa. I wrote this other portion of the code, and it's going to really hammer the side. So you don't want to do this. You don't want to do this. We got to fix this. We got to make it right. So have more eyes on it. And the bigger your code base gets, the more eyes you're going to want. Okay, so we fixed the bug. We've got help. And now we have to push it out there. When you're messing around on your own system, it's okay to build something and push it out to the Google Play Store. When you're talking about a company level thing, you're going to have a build server out there that's going to make these builds for you, and it's going to run some testing for you. It's going to put it through style checkers to make sure you're not hosing the code in any way. And after it gets done, then QA, remember, they're the firewall between you and your users. They get their hands on that build. And they'll give it a thumbs up or thumbs down. We have a really good QA guy in our team. And he's really good about saying, no, no, no. This is not right. Let's do it again. It's not fixed completely. I found an edge case. You got to fix that too. So he'll give the thumb ups or thumbs down. Now the project manager, he's the guy who kind of owns this whole thing. He's kind of saying, look, this is my project. You guys are the developers. I know that, but the heat's going to come down on me if this isn't fixed right. And he sits between you and your users. So you want to talk to him too. You want to say, hey, we got this fixed. It's going to act a little funny if we Band-Aided it, or it's going to take us a couple days to get a real fix out there. You want to talk to your project manager. So if you haven't got the hint yet, collaboration is really, really big at Ancestry, and when we're talking about the Android team. Now it's time for lunch. It's actually important. I've known developers who are like, I'm working through lunch, and they can just do that, right? But they're like, I don't know, 1 in 100. Lunch is actually a good time just to take it easy. It's kind of nice. We have the Shaky Leaf Cafe we go to, and it's like a cafeteria style salad bar and all that stuff. And they got new stuff every day. So it's nice just to kind of hang out with your team. Because you have Android developers, they're going to be in different parts. And all of our Android developers kind of come together around lunchtime for the most part. And we just sit there and we talk shop, and it's kind of good. So after lunch, a lot of people, they'll go play ping pong. They'll do foosball. We got yoga. back massages. Some people go play soccer. This is all good stuff. This is all good stuff. So I got a story back from my days when I was working defense, and this is a story I heard from a really, really gray-beard coder, you know, who worked on satellites in the 70s. And he said one time he was working in a lab, and a general walked in, and all the developers are sitting around the terminals doing their work, and the general's just getting angrier and angrier and angrier. And finally, the guy who was running it says, "Why are you so angry?" And he says, "Why aren't the programmers doing their job?" And he couldn't understand it. And so, "What do you mean they're not doing their job?" He goes, "I want to see the programmers do this." And he just expected the programmers to be typing and typing and typing the whole time. And so no, it's good to take a break. And as we all know, we just don't sit there and type and type and type. We've got to sit there and think about it. So take your breaks. They're important. Lunch is really important. All right, so you're done with lunch. You're done with your lunch plus plus. You get back to the story. Still got the story to work on. You got the bug fixed. Now let's get back to the story. All right, so you've got a third-party library that's going in there. It's going to save you some time. But now you look at it, you're like, okay, I got the programming done, but I'm not exactly sure what the front end is supposed to look like. I have to add this extra button in here. What color is it supposed to be? How big is it supposed to be? Is there any animations that's supposed to be attached to this thing? I don't know. And so you go and you look at the story, and the story doesn't really explain it. Well, you've got to go talk to the UX designer. Again, you're working on a team. You go to the UX designer and say, "Look, what color is this thing supposed to be? How big is it supposed to be there?" And he goes, "All right, give me a few minutes." Or sometimes it's a few days if they're really busy. And so the designer will come back and say, "This is how it's supposed to look like." So you never want to pull the trigger and make some silly gray button that looked like it, belonged on Windows 95. You want to do it right. And sometimes you're going to have to find out when you're in the story that it's not as modular as you like, because something else is interfering with it, and you may have to refactor some of the code. So that's another thing you may hit. Especially the older code bases you get, and if anyone who's worked in code bases that just keep getting older and older and older, they're old, and so they need to be taken care of. And sometimes you have to refactor and rip out the old code, put in the new code. You may have to do that. And again, talk with your team before you start ripping out code and replacing it, though. So here are some of the patterns that we look at when we actually are programming our stories. One is most of the time you're going to be adding something to some code base that's already there. You're adding a feature, you're plopping it in there. You want minimal disruption. I knew this one programmer who didn't like where all the curly braces were and would go through every file. And every file he changed, he would change all the curly braces up and down that thing, 500, 600 files. Now, when he went to commit that into the library, it looked like the entire thing had changed. And so you would try to find the history of what actually happened with this file, and it was a mess. Couldn't do it. So go for a minimal disruption. Use the pattern that's already there. Somebody set it up some time ago and did it that way. A developer after you is going to come along. Just make it easy for that developer who's going to come along and also going to be writing inside that code. And just keep it simple. Sometimes we get a little egotistical as developers and we want to do it our way because it's the right way, but that's not what you should be doing all the time. Again, going back to the refactoring, sometimes you have to think the consequences of doing it. And I won't go through that again, but really, if you find something needs to be refactored a lot, you just make another story out of it. Get it working now, make another story, tell your product manager, say, "Look, we should put this in the next sprint. We really need to work on this story. This code is too old and it's starting to smell." All right, so design patterns. So keep your ears open. This is where it becomes valuable to you to be part of the greater Android community. There's a lot of talk out there. I go on Reddit, I follow people on Twitter, been to Google I/O. There's a lot of other conferences you can go to and hear these things, so you can see where things are happening, where things are going, and you want to follow the patterns that are already set out there. We also use the factory pattern. I don't know how much time we have, but I don't want to hover too long on these. So again, I'll have this deck out for you to take a look at. But go through these things, and these are the ones that I found are probably the most used in Android. A lot of people hate on the singletons, but in Android sometimes it's impossible to not use them. You just got to use them wisely. Also think about testing. I know developers hate two things, testing and documentation. We hate it. We like it when it's done for us, but we hate doing it. Your QA will love you if you actually think about testing. So when you're making the story, think about, how am I going to test this? And that will help you actually make a good pattern, a really good modular design if you think about testing. We use unit tests. We're now starting to get into the swing of it more than we used to. We use JUnit. It's a Java unit testing library. There's one called Dagger that's out there. We're going to actually be looking at, and I'll talk a little bit about how we go and test these things out. But we're going to be looking about using that. It's dependency injection. So your testing will save you a lot of headache, because sometimes these bugs that come back to hurt you, well, it's because you didn't test, or your test sucked. And so because they sucked so bad, you made this big bug, and now it's disrupting you from getting your work done. So force yourself to do the unit testing. So sometimes your PM, of course, he's the guy who actually owns the project. He walks up to you. He knows you've got the story. He knows this bug hit you, and he says, how's the story going? My users really, really want the story in there. They want that cool new feature. And so he will ask you, how's the work progressing? And he may do this often. It depends on his personality. But a lot of times I like to talk to him before he talks to me. And it's better to get his input sooner than later, because sometimes he may even make a little change on you. Oh, no. We just had some testing go on, finds out the users really don't like this color, and they want you to change the size of this and this. And you're like, oh, I already did that. And so you got to go back and change it. You don't want to do that. So sometimes it's best just to go talk to your PM. We got a really good PM. I go to him all the time, and he's always willing to stop what he's doing, take the device I give him and say, look at this. What do you think? And he lets me know. So there's kind of like this universal law that says, the farther along you are in your development, the harder it is to make a change. And I think most of you guys have seen this chart here. And this is about, cost. If you catch something in development, it's really easy to fix. But the farther you go along, the harder it is to fix this feature, which may be a bug, or the feature wasn't done right. Finally, when it hits production, it's really hard to fix. So it's better to catch them in the beginning. And just going along with that, once a story is created, it's really easy for the PM to look at it, and for you to look at it and to say, okay, this thing was given the proper amount of work time that it needs to happen. And when you're building it, like I said, go to your PM. It's really easy to catch any changes that may happen. But when you're almost done, maybe you've written the unit or the testing for this already, and it's almost done, and oh, now there's a change, and I got to change not only my code, but the test that goes along with the code. And then finally, after you take your branch and merge it back into the master tree, well, if it's not done right, well, what are you doing? You're making another branch, pulling it out, and making a bunch of changes. So you also have to think of that too. So we go to our PMs quite often, and they come to us. In fact, we talk every day. Usually we stand up in the morning and just kind of tell them how we're doing. We show what we've got, and we can fix things really quick. And so you don't want to be this person at all. This is like the worst person. They go, they're like doing their own thing, they get it working, and they know that this feature's not quite done right. They know QA is not going to catch it, and they put it in the code base, and they know it's going to explode later, but they don't care. This is the worst kind of programmer. This is the kind of programmer that you don't want to hire, you don't want to work with. You don't want to be this programmer. So if you catch anything, just be honest with yourself, be honest with your PM, and say, look, we really got a problem. It's going to take some extra time to fix, so we'll handle it now. You never want to let it go out the door broken. Okay, so at Ancestry, we have a lot of back end, actually a big back end. We talk to it, we ask it for a lot of things. Our app actually has an SQLite database on the device itself that we use. But we're always going to the back end to fill it up, right? We're not alone. In fact, most apps out there for any mobile application is going to have some sort of way to store its data. So we need to talk to the back end to get that data and to fill up that database. So with the back end, maybe you're in your story, you've got to do something with the back end, and you find that, oh, the documentation, I don't know how to use the back end. I don't even know what back end endpoint I'm supposed to use. So what do? Collaboration. I brought it up before, and I'll bring it up again. Collaboration is the key to success at Ancestry. because we work together. We really do. Sometimes it gets a little heated sometimes it works really smooth, but we know that collaboration is one of the key things that makes us successful. Just going back to the Agile Manifesto, I'll go ahead and read it because I think it's cool. The most efficient and effective method of conveying information to and within a development team is face-to-face conversation. Face-to-face. Get them on the phone if you have to, Skype them, but face-to-face, if you can go walk to that developer, explain your problem, saying, look, I don't know how to use the back end. I need this data. I don't know how to get it. Don't spin your wheels and try to figure it out on your own. Don't do that. It's the real pain in the butt. We also have some teams that are called feature teams, and what they do is they basically work on a feature. And inside a feature team, you'll have a QA guy embedded, you'll have an iOS guy, an Android guy, a web front end guy, and a PM, and they will sit down right then and there and make the feature for all the platforms at the same time. The back end guy, he's there too, so you can talk to him, and it's a really nice division of labor that we've started. Sometimes Android. Historically, not so much anymore at Ancestry, but the iOS team is usually ahead because for historical reasons, iOS has just been the platform to start your mobile development on. Sometimes you can go and look at their code and say, oh, that's how the back end works. So you can look at theirs too, and I think that's a really good technique. So you may have to learn a little Objective-C and Swift to do that. And you would think that you're just Android, but you're not. You're a developer. Android may be your specialty, but really you're part of a team. And you don't want to be this fanboy, right? Because sometimes people think Android and iOS are like this. They're at each other's throats, and I've met developers who are like this sometimes, right? You don't want to be this guy. I actually cut my teeth on mobile with iOS, and I do that at night. Android is definitely my specialty. I'm much better at Android than iOS, but I can also do that too, yeah.
How is it that Android gets to be a Jedi and Apple is a cyborg?
See, those are the questions you're not supposed to ask. It doesn't matter.
What is that?
Yeah. So anyway, you don't want to be that fanboy at all, because I should say fanatical fanboy. It doesn't do any good for the company, and really it doesn't do any good for you. You may think it's great, but really, just get beyond that. You want to be more like this, all happy, sit together. You're all one big team. You got to do it for the company. So anyway, like I said before, and I'll say it again, collaborate. A lot of the developers, they have an introverted stereotype. Oh, he's the guy who just sits behind the computer and does his own thing in the dark. That's true. I started that way. It's not good for you, really. You're going to be hitting your limits. You may become a really cool coder, but if you can't function in a team, you're no good. So collaborate, learn to talk. And again, don't spin your wheels. Sometimes you're like, no, I'll figure this out. I'm a senior developer. I'm not going to go ask that junior developer. No. Go ask the junior developer. If he's been in that code base before, just ask him. Put your ego down. And just like lunch, take a break. Pay the cat tax. You gotta look at some funny cat pics. But Google has actually put out a lot of good videos recently. They had their 100 days of Google during the summer. That was awesome. They also have a Performance Matters. You can see good performance for Android. They have a design pattern one out there. Start hitting the videos. Like I said, Jake Wharton goes out there and talks, and there's more and more conferences all the time. This year, I can't even remember the names of all the Android conferences. They're all over the place. This year I went to Google I/O, learned a ton. Went to the Android Barbecue, learned a ton. We had some other people go to the other one that just was there. Steve was just over at Google itself. What was that one for?
The Developer Summit.
The Developer Summit, right. So anyway, you're going to find, if you're worried about patterns and techniques, you don't really got to go a whole lot farther than these guys. These are the experts, and these are the people out there in there doing the field. Watch what they're doing. See how they're doing it. Yeah, it's great. It's really nice. In fact, there's so much stuff out there now, you choke on it. Inevitably, there's meetings, right? Hopefully not too many. I mean, you are a developer, so you don't want to go to too many meetings. But every sprint before one sprint ends and you get all that code and it gets checked into the master tree, well, now it's time to start another 2-week cycle. So your PM will go, okay guys, let's sit down and talk about what we're going to work on. And so what we'll do is we'll size the stories. Now what this means is you have a story, say it's a feature, say you're adding like a whole new view, a whole new settings page, maybe you're turning on the microphone on the app, who knows what you're doing. But anyway, the PM, he's not a developer. Maybe he came from the developer cycle, but he is not a specialist in Android. So you have to tell him how long, or not how long, but how much effort it's going to take to get that job done. And we use, I think, Fibonacci numbers, like 1, 3, 5, 8, 13. We size them like that. And so you can kind of see how exponentially nasty things get. So if you say something is like a 13, well, that's going to take some time. If something's a 3, that'll take a day if there's no hitches. If you say something's a 1, well, you're just changing like a string or something like that. So we use Fibonacci hours. They're still out there anyway, but not really in the Agile process area so much, but more into like the waterfall and the spiral processes. There was things called man hours, and you can put so much work is going to take so many man hours, but that's kind of been disproven by a few people. And so that's why we use the idea of effort and not time, because you can't really estimate time very well. Programmers are really bad at that, but we can estimate effort. We can say, look, this thing's nastier than this other thing I worked on, so I'm going to give it a 13 and not an 8. So you can do that. And so you build up these story points and you say, the PM says, okay, so-and-so's on vacation. There's 2 days of this conference you guys are going to. So we really only have about 30 story points to spread around. And so you go through all the stories and you put points to them. And the PM decides which ones are highest priority for him, and he pulls them over. And so that's what you're going to do for the next 2 weeks. So as your day's going on, you go to the meeting. It's time to wrap it up. Day's getting close. It's 4 o'clock. You're getting tired. So you put your finishing touches out there. Make sure you write up your test case. You don't want to. Just get it done. Make it a good one. You don't want to have a half-assed test case that doesn't test any edge cases or anything like that. Yeah?
You mentioned 13 points. Do you break it up if it's that big?
Well, okay, so the question is, if you have 13 points, do you break it up? It all depends, because it's relative. These numbers are relative. In one team, a 3 may mean something that's this big, but in another team, a 3 may mean something that's this big. We had a rule where if it gets higher than 13, we break it up. I was on a team a couple quarters ago where if it was 13, it was too big, and that was getting broken up. So it all depends on it. And so you want to make sure that, again, you're being honest with your PM. And you have to do this for like maybe a quarter. And so once everyone kind of does these sprint cycles for a quarter and is sizing them, everyone kind of has the feel of what these numbers mean in terms of effort. So you have to let that sink in for like a good quarter or two, even for your PM. And so if everyone realizes that these 13-point stories they're just not making it, right? You just can't get them in that 2-week cycle. Then you say, okay, if something's sized to 13, we know it's not going to make it. Let's chop up the story a little bit. Let's work on the layout this time, and then we'll worry about the functionality this next time. So it really all depends. Check in your code. I know guys who just don't check in code. They have it on their machine. I had one guy who didn't check his code in, and then all of a sudden something bad happened to his hard drive, and poof, a week's worth of code gone because they didn't check it into the server. So you can make your own branches and stuff like that. Make sure you check it in. We had a donut rule where if we found out that if you did not check in code, you had to bring donuts like the next day if we found out. Donuts for the team. We don't do that here at Ancestry, which is too bad. Maybe it's not a good thing. I don't know. But anyway, you want to make sure you get your code checked in at night. And then you make a pull request once it's done. Once the story is done, you say, a pull request says, hey, I would like to take this branch and push it into the master. And you assign people to go and review your code and review what you've done. And so you make a request. And you get whatever the team's rules are, you say, okay, if you get 1 or 2 guys that say, hey, this is good, they give a thumbs up, well, then you can merge it right back into the tree. So we use pull requests as just a way to keep our master branch safe. We use target process. There's a lot of different things out there to track it. Does anyone here know Trello? Everyone use Trello? Trello, it's like that. I mean, if you use Trello, these things that kind of manage your stories and where they are and that sort of a thing, you want to just basically mark it as being done. You move it over so maybe your team lead walks in and looks at your story and he says, this guy's been working on this 3-point story for a week, and it causes all sorts of chaos. This is just one of the things you want to do. And if you move it over, then that lets QA know, hey, you got something out there to test. So that's what we do at Ancestry. Go home. So day's over, go home. I know a lot of people, we're not Silicon Valley, and I'm glad we're not, because some of those guys there, they just like to really stay there all the time, and it's just part of the culture to like put in some late nights and that sort of thing. I really like it here because that expectation at Ancestry anyway doesn't exist. So we go home at a reasonable hour, and we get to do something else. It's really nice. Or if you really dig what you're doing, then go ahead. If you find something during the day that you didn't really understand, if you're walking in somebody else's code and you're like, what the heck does that annotation mean? I have no idea. Look it up that night. You got some time to do it. There's no pressure. I keep a list of these, of all these things that I don't know. I mean, I've been doing this for a while, and there's always stuff I don't know. I don't know, there's a lot I don't know. And so I make a list of these things, and I just like put them on my list, and during the weekend or at night, I'll just take a half hour and check them off, and it feels good to learn something new. So that's your typical day. Now we have these strange days, these one-off days. Does anyone know this is from? Bonus points if you do. The Doors! Give that man some points. Yep. So they had an album called Strange Days. I grew up with it, and I really like the graphic. Thursday, Tech Day. At Ancestry, Thursday is Tech Day. This is our day to fight code rot. This is our day to look at old code that is all busted up. And even though it works, it's getting old now. And we need to pluck it out and put in the new stuff because code will rot. Technical debt. Anyone heard that term? Technical debt? Yep. So basically, you pay a price for leaving code alone. Has anyone here pulled up code from 2 years ago that you've written and it doesn't compile? It happens a lot, right? Or you look at it and you're like, oh, that's disgusting. I can't believe I did that. You want to fix it, right? So this is what we use. And we make tech stories. We put them in the backlog, and on Thursday we go, oh, what do we got out here to fix? What needs to be updated? Has nothing to do with what the PM wants. It's really about your code base. And you tell the PM, look, we got to keep our code base up. I know you want to get all these features in, but we really need this day to keep the code base alive. So we grab these tech stories. Sometimes we'll grab I want to do XYZ kind of a thing, like, oh, I heard about this cool thing. I want to take 4 hours and just mess with it today. Okay, that's what Thursdays are for. So it's really nice over at Ancestry. We get to take a little break. Sometimes we feel pressure not to, because maybe the story is not getting done because you're taking it. But really, it's very important to take these tech days. And me and the other team lead, we're always looking at each other going, oh, it's tech day. Oh, we really want our guys to get the work done, but we got to let them have this tech day. Otherwise, you're going to pay that price in the end because that debt builds. All right, so sometimes we have super huge refactors. Sometimes the PM goes, I want this. And we look at our code base, we're like, that is not going to handle it. And it's more than just one story. And so sometimes we'll suck in all these developers who are on these feature teams. We'll say, look, this next sprint, we're pulling them in, and we're all working together to get this thing fixed. And so we cooperate with the other project managers, and we say, look, this has got to be done. And so it's like a tech day for weeks. These things got to be tested and tested and tested. So sometimes we encounter this. I think we had a really big one we just did, and I think we'll have another one next quarter, like Q1 next year. We'll have another big refactor of stuff we got to pull out. Then we have a thing called FedEx days. These are kind of fun. You got 24 hours to deliver something. So basically, big management will call a timeout for all the engineers in the company. Says we have this FedEx day. This means you got literally 24 hours. You're not sleeping. Well, maybe get a few hours in. But you start in the morning and you just go. You're just making something. You're just building something. Maybe you're talking with the iOS team and collaborating with them. Maybe you're talking with the back end. Maybe it's just you and one other guy. You're just making anything. And you build it, and you have 24 hours, and they bring in dinner at night and snacks. And sometimes they're like, okay, here's the 2 a.m. crew. They'll take a picture. Let's say who made it to 4 a.m. They'll take another picture. But after 24 hours, then you deliver something. And everyone kind of gets there and gives like a punch-drunk presentation because they're really tired about what they did. And those are pretty fun. And then we have these mobile hackathons. Basically, it's just a mobile team. It's like a FedEx day, but we get to go home. and that's kind of nice too. We'll fly in people from like San Francisco and stuff like that, and we'll meet with them because it's good to be face to face with people you don't meet who are you have Androiders out there in all these other places. Well, you want to meet them too. Maybe you see them on Skype or Slack or whatever you're using to talk, but you need to meet up with them and collaborate with them. They're sitting over there in their own little environment and wherever they are, and you're over here in yours, and you want to bring these two thoughts together. It's just when things are diverse like that, you want to bring it back together. Again, collaboration. We have a conference that is a couple days every summer, and it's cool because we get to bring in everyone. It's like our own little conference, our Ancestry conference, and we get to put it on, and we get to talk about the things that we think are important, and they're pretty fun. They're very loose. We get to go there. We get a cool T-shirt, and we get a playtime too. So at the end of the session, usually the company says, "Okay, everyone, we're going to Snowbird and go play there for a day," or something like that. So that's pretty fun. So really, this is the conclusion here. Just going back to the skills, these are generally the things that, of course, you're going to have to be good at. Again, bringing up collaboration, doesn't get old, agile processes. But really, I think the last bullet point there, I should have made it bigger. For me and for the Android team in Ancestry, the most important thing is passion. You got to love what you're doing. If you love what you're doing, then everything else tends to fall into place. If your passion for it is big enough to overcome your ego, that's the best. That means you're learning. You're one of those star developers. You're willing to share. You're willing to take your own time out to actually fix something and do it right. So passion. Make sure you have the passion for what you're doing. And if you don't, find it. And if you find your passion is something else, move on to that. But really, passion is what gets things done at our team. And we note that. We recognize that. So anyway, go ahead.
Maybe regarding for skills,
Yeah.
I'm curious, are the UX designers also Android developers? I'm just curious if they decide on a user experience that can't be built, when you decide to make a slide or something like
Okay,
that. Like revolutionary UI experience.
Yes, that's a good question. So the question is, do UX people, how involved are they with the whole Android programming? Do they know how to make a good Android experience? We kind of had to train ours. Material design is like one of the big design patterns out there now for Android. It's actually starting to bleed off into the normal JavaScript area, front-end stuff too. I can't remember their term for it. It starts with a P. But what's that? Polymer, thank you very much. It's called Polymer. But anyway, we had to train ours. We said, look, this is important. If we want to be featured by Google in the Play Store, this is what we got to have. And so we train them, they look into it, and they have now started to come back to us saying, this is material design, use this. And it's been very good. So again, that collaboration. Any other questions? Any questions? We can hit me up if later if you don't, or if you just, whatever, I'm done. So yeah.
What tool do you use? I was going to say, what tool do you use for code reviews?
For code reviews, really, it's pretty archaic. We just print it up. we print up our code and we drop it on each other's desk. Everyone gets a copy. Make sure it's in landscape, in color, so everyone can see all the syntax coloration. And we say, okay, you got 24 hours to look at this because the next day we're going to have a code review. So that's what we use. We just kind of go through it class by class. Anything else? No? All right. Well, thanks for hearing me out. Hopefully I didn't talk too long.